Tonight, we travel to the early 20th century, to a world of empires and alliances, of railways and telegraphs, of men in uniforms marching across the fields of Europe, and of a conflict so vast and so transforming that it reshaped every border, every government, and every assumption about how the modern world worked. The story of the First World War is the story of how one century ended and another truly began. If this kind of slow journey through history helps you rest and learn, consider subscribing so you never miss an episode, and a like helps more people find this channel. Now settle in and let us begin. We begin in Europe, in the years before 1914, a continent of great powers, of old empires and new nations, of crowded cities and quiet farming villages, of railways crossing mountain ranges and rivers, of telegraph wires stretching from capital to capital, of newspapers read by millions, of armies trained and equipped on a scale the world has never seen before. Europe in 1914 is the most powerful region on Earth. Its empires extend across every continent. The British Empire spans roughly a quarter of the world's land surface. France controls vast territories in Africa and Asia. Germany, unified only in 1871, has built an industrial and military machine of remarkable efficiency. Austria-Hungary governs a large, diverse territory in Central Europe. 11 major languages, dozens of ethnic groups, all under the rule of the Habsburg dynasty. Russia stretches from Eastern Europe to the Pacific coast. The largest country in the world by land area, the Ottoman Empire, weakened but still present, controls Turkey and parts of the Middle East. These powers are connected by trade, by diplomatic relationships, by royal family ties. The monarchs of Germany, Russia, and Britain are closely related. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, King George V of Britain, all grandsons of Queen Victoria, cousins, writing letters to each other, sometimes in English, calling each other by nicknames, Willie, Nicky, Georgie, and yet the continent is divided into two alliance systems, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Britain. Each side has made commitments to the others. If one is attacked, the others will come to its defense. These commitments were meant to provide security, to deter aggression, by making the cost of war too high. But the same commitments create a mechanism, a chain reaction. If one country goes to war, it pulls in its allies. And if those allies go to war, they pull in their allies. A small conflict can become a large one. A regional dispute can become a continental war. This is the mechanism that will be activated in the summer of 1914. The Balkans, the southeastern corner of Europe, a region of mountains and rivers and mixed populations, where Ottoman power has been retreating for decades, where new nations are forming, where Austria-Hungary and Russia both have interests, where the great powers watch each other carefully, where the tension is highest. Austria-Hungary rules Bosnia and Herzegovina, territories in the Western Balkans, annexed formally in 1908, a decision that angered many in the region, particularly the Kingdom of Serbia, which shares cultural and ethnic ties with the South Slavic people of Bosnia, and which has its own ambitions, its own sense of national identity, its own desire to see South Slavic peoples united. On the 28th of June, 1914, the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand visits Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. He is the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. He travels in an open car through the streets of the city. A young man named Gavrilo Princip is in the crowd. He is a Bosnian Serb, a member of a secret organization called the Black Hand, which has connections to Serbian nationalist movements. He shoots the Archduke and the Archduke's wife Sophie. Both die that day. The assassination is the trigger, not the cause. The tensions, the rivalries, the alliance systems, the arms races, the nationalism, all of those are the causes. The assassination is the moment that sets the mechanism in motion. Austria-Hungary blames Serbia. It issues an ultimatum, a list of demands so extensive that Serbia cannot fully accept them without surrendering its sovereignty. Serbia accepts most of the demands, but not all. Austria-Hungary declares it insufficient. On the 28th of July, 1914, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. The chain reaction begins. Russia begins to mobilize its forces in support of Serbia. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, tells Russia to stop. Russia does not stop. Germany declares war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, begins to mobilize. Germany declares war on France. Germany has a war plan, the Schlieffen Plan, developed over years, designed for the reality that Germany faces enemies on two fronts. France to the west, Russia to the east. The plan calls for a rapid defeat of France first, before Russia can fully mobilize, then turning east to deal with Russia. The fastest route to Paris goes through Belgium, through the flat lowlands of northern Europe. Easier terrain than the heavily fortified border between Germany and France directly. Germany asks Belgium for permission to march through. Belgium refuses. Germany marches through anyway. Britain has guaranteed Belgian neutrality. In a treaty from 1839, the British government demands that Germany respect Belgian neutrality. Germany does not. Britain declares war on Germany. On the 4th of August, 1914, within 6 weeks of the assassination in Sarajevo, the major European powers are at war. The mechanism has worked exactly as the system was designed to prevent. The German army moves through Belgium. Rapidly at first. The Belgian army resists. More than expected. The fortress city of Liège holds for 12 days. Before falling to the German advance. The German advance continues. Into France. Toward Paris. The French army and the small British expeditionary force retreat southward. The situation for France is serious. The government considers leaving Paris. But at the Marne River, east of Paris, the retreat stops. In early September 1914, the French and British armies turn and fight. The Battle of the Marne lasts about a week. The German advance is halted. The Germans pull back to higher ground to the north. The Schlieffen Plan has failed. France has not been defeated quickly. The war will not be over by Christmas, as many had assumed it would be. The war will last 4 more years. What follows is called the race to the sea. Both sides try to outflank the other, moving northward. Each time one side tries to go around the other's flank, the other extends their line further north, until both lines reach the English Channel. There is nowhere left to go. The front is fixed, from the Channel in the north to the Swiss border in the south. A line across France and Belgium, nearly 800 kilometers long, and both sides begin to dig. The trenches. This is what the Western Front becomes. A system of trenches stretching from the sea to Switzerland. On the German side, and on the Allied side, facing each other, sometimes only a few hundred meters apart, sometimes closer. A trench is not a simple ditch. It is a constructed position, dug to a depth of about 2 meters, wide enough for men to stand and move. The walls reinforced with timber frames, with sandbags stacked on the parapet above, duckboards laid on the floor, to keep feet out of the mud. When there is mud, the trenches are not straight. They zigzag, so that if an enemy gets into a section of trench, he cannot fire straight along it. He can only see a short distance in either direction. The zigzag limits the damage a single attacker can do. Behind the front-line trench, support trenches, and behind those reserve trenches, connected by communication trenches, running roughly perpendicular to the front. So men and supplies can move forward and backward without being exposed to direct fire. The whole system, when fully developed, is a maze. A complex network of channels in the ground, kilometers deep. Life in the trenches is shaped by routine, and by mud, and by cold, and by waiting. The day begins before dawn. Stand to. Every man in the trench stands at the fire step, the raised platform near the top of the trench wall. He looks out over no man's land, his rifle ready. The most dangerous time of day is dawn, when light comes and visibility improves. This is when attacks are most likely. So every man stands at the ready, every morning, whether there is an attack or not. Stand-to lasts until full daylight. Then stand down. The men are dismissed to their morning tasks. Breakfast. If there is hot food, it has been carried forward from the field kitchens behind the lines, in containers, sometimes cold by the time it arrives. Tea is essential. Hot, strong, sweet tea. The British Army's dependence on tea is not a joke. It is a daily reality. Something warm, something familiar, something that makes the morning bearable. After breakfast, the routine work of the trench. Repairing the walls where they have collapsed, replacing sandbags, pumping out water that has accumulated in the bottom, cleaning rifles, inspecting feet. Foot inspection is a medical requirement. Trench foot is a serious condition, caused by prolonged exposure to cold, wet conditions. The feet become swollen, painful. The tissue can be damaged. In severe cases, feet must be amputated. Keeping feet dry is difficult in the trenches, but officers must check, must ensure men have dry socks, must take it seriously, because trench foot takes men out of the line as surely as enemy fire. The rats. The trenches of the Western Front are infested with rats. Huge rats, fed on the waste of hundreds of thousands of men, on the food that is spilled, on things in no man's land that the rats also find. The soldiers hate the rats. They trap them, kill them, but the rats always come back. The lice. Every man in the trenches has lice. Small insects living in the seams of clothing, in the hair, biting, itching. The soldiers call them chat. They spend time chatting, running a thumbnail along the seams of their shirts, killing the lice one by one. It never fully works. There are always more. The itching is constant. The sounds. The trenches are never entirely silent. Artillery fires regularly, sometimes in the distance, a steady rumble, sometimes close. A sharp crack and a rushing sound and an explosion. Snipers are active. A crack from no man's land. Someone has exposed themselves slightly above the parapet. The snipers on both sides are patient and precise. Men learn quickly not to raise their heads. At night, the activity increases. Patrols go out into no man's land, the strip of ground between the opposing trenches. checking the wire, listening for enemy movement, sometimes bringing in the wounded who could not be retrieved during daylight, sometimes cutting the enemy's wire, preparing for future operations, moving in darkness, low to the ground, slowly, no man's land, the space between the trenches. It varies in width, sometimes a few dozen meters, sometimes several hundred. It is crossed by barbed wire, entanglements set up by both sides, to slow any attack, to channel attackers into killing grounds covered by machine guns. The ground is churned by shell fire, craters, water filled in wet weather, sometimes bodies, men who fell during previous attacks, who could not be retrieved, who remain in no man's land. The machine gun. This weapon defines the defensive nature of the Western Front. A single machine gun, properly positioned, can fire hundreds of rounds per minute. It can cover a wide field of fire. It can cut down men advancing across open ground faster than any weapon available before this war. The machine gun makes the frontal attack across no man's land catastrophically costly. And yet frontal attacks are ordered again and again, because there is no other way to take ground from a defended trench system. The artillery, the dominant weapon of the First World War. More men are killed by artillery than by any other weapon in this conflict. Artillery comes in many sizes. Small field guns that fire directly, large howitzers that lob shells in a high arc, to fall down behind cover, into trenches, into positions that direct fire cannot reach. The largest guns can fire shells weighing hundreds of kilograms, over distances of many kilometers. An artillery bombardment before an attack is meant to cut the enemy wire, to destroy the enemy trenches, to kill the defenders, to make the advance across no man's land possible. In practice, the bombardments often fail to achieve all of these goals. The wire is scattered rather than cut. The defenders survive in deep dugouts, and when the bombardment stops, they climb out. They man their machine guns, and they wait for the advancing infantry. The Battle of the Somme. It begins on the 1st of July, 1916. After 7 days of intense artillery bombardment, the British commanders believe the German defenses have been destroyed. The men go over the top, climbing out of the trenches, walking forward across no man's land, into fire. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme, the British Army suffers approximately 57,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. In a single day. It is the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. The Battle of the Somme lasts until November. Over 4 months. Both sides suffer enormous losses. The line moves a few kilometers in places, barely at all in others. The battle does not achieve a breakthrough. It does not end the war. But it kills and wounds over 1 million men in total. On both sides, the Battle of Verdun, in 1916 as well. On the French sector of the front, the German High Command decides to attack Verdun, a fortified city that the French cannot afford to lose. The plan is to draw the French army into a battle of attrition, to bleed France white, to force France to commit so many men to defending Verdun that the French army is destroyed as a fighting force. The battle lasts from February to December. 10 months. Nearly 1 million casualties combined. French and German. The fortress city holds. At enormous cost. Verdun becomes, in French memory, the symbol of resistance, of endurance, of the price paid to hold the line. The war on the Western Front is not only about the trenches, artillery duels, air reconnaissance and air combat. The new aircraft, primitive at the beginning of the war, develop rapidly. They become faster, more reliable, armed with machine guns synchronized to fire through the propeller arc. Pilots on both sides become famous. The aces, men with dozens of kills, flying above the mud and the wire, in machines made of wood and canvas. The Eastern Front is different. In the east, the lines are longer, the territory vaster, the railway networks less developed, the defensive systems less elaborate. There is more movement, more open warfare. Russia mobilizes its enormous army, the largest in the world by sheer numbers, but poorly equipped, poorly supplied, its officer corps sometimes poorly trained, its communications often inadequate. Russia fights on a long front against both Germany and Austria-Hungary. The early battles are mixed. Russia achieves some successes against Austria-Hungary, but suffers catastrophic defeats against Germany. At Tannenberg in August 1914, a German force encircles and destroys an entire Russian army. Over 90,000 prisoners taken. Russia continues to fight, continues to suffer losses. The losses are enormous. By some estimates, Russia suffers more casualties than any other combatant. Millions killed and wounded and captured over 4 years. The strain on Russian society is immense. The economy struggles. Food shortages develop. The government under Tsar Nicholas II becomes increasingly unable to manage the crisis. Trust in the monarchy collapses. In February 1917, revolution breaks out in Russia. The Tsar abdicates. A provisional government takes power, attempts to continue the war. Then, in October 1917, the Bolsheviks seize power. Lenin and the Bolsheviks are committed to ending the war. They negotiate an armistice with Germany, and then a separate peace, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Signed in March 1918, Russia leaves the war. Germany can now concentrate entirely on the Western Front. Other fronts. The war is not only in Europe. The Ottoman Empire enters the war on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary in October 1914. This opens new theaters of conflict. The Gallipoli Campaign. British and Anzac forces, troops from Australia and New Zealand, land on the Gallipoli Peninsula in April 1915, trying to open a route through the Dardanelles to Constantinople, to knock the Ottomans out of the war, to open a supply route to Russia. The landings are contested from the first moment. The defenders are prepared. The terrain is difficult. Steep cliffs, narrow beaches. The attackers cannot advance beyond the beachhead. The campaign settles into a pattern similar to the Western Front. Trenches, attacks that gain little ground, enormous casualties. After 8 months, the decision is made to evacuate. The troops are withdrawn. Quietly, skillfully. The evacuation is one of the most successful operations of the whole campaign. Far more successful than the landings. The Gallipoli campaign costs over 500,000 casualties on both sides. It achieves none of its strategic objectives. In Mesopotamia, British and Indian forces campaign against the Ottomans, initially advancing toward Baghdad, then suffering a significant defeat at Kut al-Amara in 1916, where a British force is besieged and eventually surrenders. A humiliating reversal. Eventually recovered when British forces take Baghdad in 1917. In Palestine and Syria, British and Arab forces campaign against the Ottoman army. T. Lawrence, a British officer, works with Arab irregular forces, leading raids on the Hejaz Railway, disrupting Ottoman supply lines, This campaign eventually leads to the capture of Jerusalem in December 1917, and the eventual defeat of Ottoman forces in the region. In Africa, German colonial territories are fought over. German East Africa, German Southwest Africa, German Cameroon, German Togoland, all eventually captured by British, South African, French, and Belgian forces. A war that is officially about Europe reaches into every corner of the world. The war at sea. Britain is an island. It depends on imported food and raw materials. Control of the sea lanes is essential. The British Navy is the largest in the world. It maintains a blockade of Germany, preventing German imports. Over time, this blockade causes real shortages in Germany. Of food, of materials, of everything that must come by sea. Germany responds with the submarine, the U-boat, undersea boat, underwater boats. They cannot fight the surface fleet directly, but they can attack merchant ships. They can cut the supply lines to Britain. Germany declares a war zone around Britain, in which any ship, including neutral ones, may be attacked. This has consequences. On the 7th of May 1915, the British ocean liner Lusitania is torpedoed by a German submarine. Off the coast of Ireland, the ship sinks in 18 minutes. 1,198 people die, including 128 American citizens. The United States is not yet in the war. American public opinion is outraged. Germany, facing American pressure, restricts its submarine campaign. In 1917, Germany resumes unrestricted submarine warfare, calculating that Britain can be starved into submission before America can effectively intervene. This calculation proves wrong. Also in 1917, a decoded German telegram becomes public. The Zimmermann telegram, a secret communication from the German foreign minister to the German ambassador in Mexico, proposing that if the United States enters the war against Germany, Germany will support Mexico in reconquering Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The telegram is intercepted by British intelligence, passed to the United States. Its publication in American newspapers causes fury. On the 6th of April 1917, the United States declares war on Germany. President Woodrow Wilson addresses Congress. The world must be made safe for democracy. American men begin to be drafted, trained, equipped, shipped to France. The arrival of American forces takes time. The American Army in 1917 is small. It must be built up enormously, trained from scratch, transported across the Atlantic, past the German submarines. But the flow begins, slowly at first, then faster. By 1918, American troops are arriving in France at the rate of 10,000 a day. Fresh, well-fed, enthusiastic, replacing the exhausted, depleted armies of France and Britain. Germany recognizes the problem. Once American forces are fully deployed, Germany cannot win. The numbers are too overwhelming. Germany decides to strike before the Americans arrive in strength. In March 1918, Germany launches its great offensive, Operation Michael, using new tactics developed on the Eastern Front. Stormtrooper tactics, small units of specially trained infantry, moving fast, bypassing strong points, penetrating deep into the Allied lines, leaving the strong points for the units following behind. The offensive achieves the greatest territorial gains on the Western Front since 1914. The German army breaks through. It advances kilometers. In a war where gains have been measured in hundreds of meters, Paris is threatened. The Allies consider whether to retreat to the Channel ports. But the offensive runs out of momentum. The German soldiers advance and find themselves in areas that have not been devastated by years of trench warfare. Areas with food, with alcohol, with things they have not seen in years. The advance slows. The supply lines cannot keep up. The men are exhausted. The reserves are used up. The Allies hold, barely, and appoint a supreme commander, Ferdinand Foch, a French general, to coordinate the Allied response across all sectors. In August 1918, the Allies counterattack. The 100 Days Offensive, beginning with the Battle of Amiens. On the 8th of August, British and Commonwealth and French forces, now supported by tanks in large numbers, break through the German lines. The German commander Ludendorff calls this the Black Day of the German Army. The tanks, a new weapon, developed by the British, first used in 1916 at the Somme. Unreliable then, too few, but developed and improved. Used in mass for the first time at the Battle of Cambrai in 1917, and then at Amiens in 1918. A tracked armored vehicle that can cross barbed wire, that can crush machine gun positions, that can move across the shell-torn ground of no man's land. The weapon that offers a solution to the defensive dominance of the trenches. The Allied offensive continues through August and September and October. The German army retreats, fights. It slows the advance, but it cannot stop it. The German lines contract. Germany's allies collapse first. Bulgaria signs an armistice in September. The Ottoman Empire in October. Austria-Hungary in early November. Germany is fighting alone. Inside Germany, the situation is desperate. The British naval blockade has been in effect for 4 years. Food is scarce. Civilian populations are malnourished. The turnip winter of 1916 and 1917 lives in German memory, when turnips became the primary food source for many German civilians, because potatoes and other staples were unavailable. Revolution spreads through Germany. Sailors in Kiel mutiny. Workers' and soldiers' councils form in cities across the country. The Kaiser abdicates. He crosses into the Netherlands, into exile, where he will live until 1941. A republic is proclaimed. German representatives cross the front lines. They travel to a railway siding in the forest of Compiègne in northern France. They board a railway carriage, the carriage of the French commander Ferdinand Foch. They negotiate, and at 11 in the morning on the 11th of November, 1918, the armistice takes effect. The guns stop. The silence must have been extraordinary. After 4 years of almost constant artillery, of rifle fire, of the sounds of industrial war on an unprecedented scale, suddenly, nothing. Men on both sides stand in their trenches, or climb out, and look at each other across no man's land. The wire is still there. The mud is still there. The craters are still there. But the shooting has stopped. The numbers. The war has killed approximately 17 million people, military and civilian combined. Some estimates are higher. The precise count is impossible, because many deaths go unrecorded, because records are lost, because the chaos of war does not permit careful accounting. Another estimate, 21 million wounded, many of them permanently disabled, limbs lost, lungs damaged by gas, eyes destroyed, faces reconstructed by the early plastic surgeons who work throughout the war on men whose injuries require something that has not been tried before. The Spanish flu. A pandemic begins in 1918. Its origins are debated. It spreads along the movement patterns of the war. Soldiers and displaced civilians carrying it from country to country. The pandemic kills more people than the war itself. Estimates range from 50 to 100 million dead worldwide. By 1920, in 2 years, more than the war killed in 4. The war and the pandemic together transform the demographic landscape of the world. The peace. The Paris Peace Conference opens in January 1919. Representatives of 32 nations gather. The defeated powers are not invited. They will be presented with terms. The dominant figures are 3. Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Georges Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Britain. Wilson arrives with a program, the 14 points, a vision for a new international order, self-determination of peoples, open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, a League of Nations, an international body to resolve disputes peacefully, to prevent another war like this one. Clemenceau has different priorities. France has borne the most fighting on the Western Front. French soil has been devastated. French cities damaged. French men killed in enormous numbers. Clemenceau wants Germany to pay, to be disarmed, to be unable to wage war again, to pay reparations, to be held responsible. Lloyd George is somewhere between the two, aware that an excessively punitive peace might cause future problems, but also aware of British public opinion, which wants Germany punished. The Treaty of Versailles is signed on the 28th of June, 1919, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the same place where the German Empire had been proclaimed in 1871. After France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, the symbolism is deliberate. The treaty's terms are severe for Germany. Germany loses territory. Alsace-Lorraine returned to France. The Polish corridor giving Poland access to the sea, cutting through German territory. Colonies stripped away. The German army limited to 100,000 men. No air force. A navy severely restricted. The War Guilt Clause. Article 231 of the treaty. Germany and its allies accept responsibility for causing the war, and therefore responsibility for all the loss and damage suffered by the Allies. This is the legal basis for reparations. The total amount is set in 1921, 132 billion gold marks. An enormous sum. Germany will not finish paying it until 2010, nearly a century after the war began. The map of Europe is redrawn. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is dissolved. New nations emerge. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Poland restored after over a century of partition. Hungary becomes an independent state. Austria becomes a small republic. The Ottoman Empire is partitioned. Its Arab territories divided between Britain and France as mandates. Palestine under British mandate, Syria under French mandate, Iraq under British mandate. The modern borders of the Middle East are drawn largely in this period, by European diplomats who know the region imperfectly, drawing lines through territories with complex mixes of peoples and cultures, lines whose consequences are still felt today. The League of Nations is established. Wilson's great project, an international body for the peaceful resolution of disputes. The United States Senate does not ratify the Versailles Treaty. The United States does not join the League. The country that proposed it, whose president fought for it, stays out. The League functions without its most powerful potential member, with predictable limitations. Germany in the early 1920s is in crisis. The reparations payments. the loss of territory, the restriction of the military, political instability, attempted coups, then hyperinflation. In 1923, the German mark collapses. A loaf of bread costs billions of marks. People carry money in wheelbarrows. The savings of the German middle class are wiped out. The experience of this economic catastrophe is not forgotten. It is part of the background against which the politics of the 1930s unfold. The veterans. Millions of men return home, changed, some physically, missing limbs, damaged lungs from gas attacks, faces reconstructed, some psychologically, shell shock, as it is called at the time, what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Men who cannot sleep, who have nightmares, who cannot function in civilian life as they once did. The psychological damage of the war is real and widespread, and poorly understood at the time. The writers and artists of the war leave a record. Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, Rupert Brooke, Robert Graves, writers who served in the trenches, who wrote about what they saw, in poetry and in prose. Their work is still read, still taught. Owen's poem Dulce et Decorum Estate, describing a gas attack, describing the death of a man who cannot get his gas mask on in time. The poem addresses those who speak of the old lie, that it is sweet and proper to die for your country. The poem is a rebuttal, written by someone who was there, who saw what dying in this war actually looked like. The cemeteries, across northern France and Belgium, row after row of white headstones, maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and the equivalent bodies for France, Germany, the United States, and other nations. The Tyne-Cot Cemetery in Belgium, 12,000 graves, the largest Commonwealth War cemetery in the world. The Thiepval Memorial on the Somme, listing the names of 72,000 British and South African soldiers who died on the Somme, and who have no known grave, whose bodies were not recovered, or were recovered but could not be identified. 72,000 names on one memorial, for one battle, on one front, of one war, the unknown soldier, an idea that emerges from the war. A single unidentified soldier, representing all the dead who cannot be named, buried in Westminster Abbey in London, in the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, in the Arlington National Cemetery in the United States, at the Altar della Patria in Rome. In each country, an unknown soldier, standing for all the unknown dead. The war changes everything, for empires fall. The German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, all gone before the war ends, or shortly after. The map of the world is redrawn. New nations appear. Old certainties vanish. The role of women changes. With millions of men at the front, women fill the roles they leave behind. Working in factories, in offices, in hospitals, driving ambulances, managing farms. Women demonstrate that they can do what was previously considered men's work. The argument that women should not have the vote becomes harder to sustain. Britain gives women over 30 the vote in 1918. Full equal suffrage follows in 1928. The United States passes the 19th Amendment in 1920. Technology accelerates. Aircraft, tanks, poison gas, submarines, radio communication, medicine. The war drives development in all of these areas, some with terrible applications, some with applications that eventually benefit peacetime life. The war also plants the seeds of what follows. the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty, the economic chaos of the 1920s, the political instability of the new republics, the unresolved national questions, the disappointed expectations, the sense among many in Germany that the war had been lost not on the battlefield but through betrayal at home, the stab-in-the-back myth, historically false, but politically powerful. The conditions that will produce the Second World War are already present in the aftermath of the First. The war that was supposed to end all wars is also, in a profound and tragic sense, the beginning of what comes next. But that is a different story. For tonight we remain here, in November 1918, in the silence after the guns stop. A soldier in a trench on the Western Front. November 11th. At 11 in the morning. He has survived. He does not know yet what this means, what the world will look like, what his life will be. He only knows that the shooting has stopped. He climbs up onto the parapet. He looks out over no man's land. The wire, the craters, the mud. He has been looking at this view for months, years perhaps, and it is still there, but silent. Somewhere across that ground, on the other side, another man does the same. Climbs up, looks across, sees the man on the other side, and neither of them fires. The war is over. The quiet begins. In the cemeteries of Belgium and France, the grass grows over the graves. White stones in long rows. Names carved in stone. Dates. Regiments. Sometimes a few words chosen by a family. Known unto God. A phrase for those whose names could not be carved. Because no one knew who they were. The poppies grow. Red poppies. In the disturbed soil of the Somme and Flanders. They grow where the earth has been turned, where shells have fallen, where graves have been dug. The red poppy becomes a symbol of remembrance, of the fields where so many fell. The world that emerges from the war is different from the one that entered it. Older in some ways, wiser about certain things, more cautious about certain words. The word glory, the word honor, as applied to industrial war. These words do not come as easily after 1918 as they did before 1914. Something has been learned, something has been lost, and the world carries both. Forward into the century that the war has opened. We slow down now. The narration settles toward its close. It is an evening in 1919, somewhere in England, or France, or Germany. A veteran sits at a table. He is writing a letter, or perhaps he is reading one, from someone who remembers him from before, who wants to know how he is. Outside, the world is continuing. Children playing in the street, the sound of a cart, someone calling from a window. Ordinary life, which is exactly what it was called during the war. Ordinary life, the thing they were fighting to return to. He looks out the window, at the ordinary street, at the ordinary evening, and after a while he goes back to his letter. If tonight's journey through the First World War helped you rest and learn, a like and a subscribe helps more people find this channel. New history narrations are uploaded regularly. Sleep well, and thank you for listening.